Hey guys, today I'm going to talk about a diet that was not used by an old school bodybuilder, but it was used by an old school action star who, of course, had to do bodybuilding to look the part. And his name is Peter Lupus, the guy who played the strongman in the original Mission Impossible TV series. First of all, before we get into his diet, let's get a little bit of background. And let's particularly note that he trained at Vince Gironda's gym. Okay? I train at Vince Gironda's gym in Studio City, which is the real mecca for the top bodybuilders. And they and Vince are a great bunch of guys. We were particularly glad to see Don Howarth take the Mr. America title this year. He really deserved it. The reason for the specialized movements is, of course, Vince and his teachings. He's developed stars like Don, Larry Scott, Bill McArdle, and many others. I'm just following their lead and using really effective exercises. Okay, now that we know who he got his nutritional advice from, let's take a closer look at his diet. What about your diet, Pete? My main nutritional item is protein, which I take 3 times a day. It gives me a lot of energy in addition to keeping my muscular weight steady. In addition to this, I have 1 or 2 simple meals a day, usually consisting of broiled ground meat, pushed cottage cheese, and tomato or fruit. I especially watch my starch and sweets consumption to keep my weight steady. Of course, I eat out from time to time. I prefer Japanese and Chinese foods, which are both tasty and nutritious. Now, since we know that he trained with Larry Scott, with Vince Gironda, we can have a much better idea of what his diet was really like. First of all, when he says his main nutrition came from protein, it wasn't the macronutrient protein, it was from protein powder, protein shakes. Okay? We also know that Vince Gironda, Rio Blair, Larry Scott, all those guys would mix heavy cream and whole milk together and then put the protein powder in, which was basically making their own half and half. Or they would just drink straight cream with protein powder in it. Sometimes they'd add raw eggs. What I'm basically saying is a lot of his nutrition came from protein shakes mixed with a lot of fat. He says he had 1 or 2 meals a day. Larry Scott would have protein shakes 3 times a day and 3 meals a day. But Larry Scott was a lot bigger and probably trained a lot harder than this actor. So he would only need 1 or 2 meals a day. And it was just red meat and cottage cheese, okay, which is a very common bodybuilding diet back in the day. When he says he'd have some tomato or some fruit, what I think is it was just a couple slices of tomato, maybe a couple pieces of salad. Basically the thing that I get when I go to a restaurant and I order a hamburger with no bun and no ketchup. Okay? And also, when he does eat carbs, it says he eats Japanese or Chinese from time to time, but that's basically just a cheat meal. When he goes out to eat, he might splurge and have a cheat meal. But in general, the diet that he used to stay in shape for these TV shows, and I think he did some movies in Europe, as a matter of fact, the diet that he used to stay in shape for what he was doing on the silver screen was basically just low carb, high fat, and high protein, like almost everybody else did back in the 60s and the 70s.